The air in the Meadowbrook Estates clubhouse hung thick with the scent of industrial-grade air freshener and simmering resentment. Mark Corrigan stood before the Architectural Control Committee, a manila folder tucked under his arm. Across the folding table sat Carol Peterson, president of the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association. Her posture was ramrod straight, her floral blouse buttoned to the collar, and her smile was a thin, bloodless line of polite disapproval. Two other committee members flanked her, looking studiously at their notepads, deferring to her with practiced ease. The inspection had been her idea, a routine community harmony review, as the email had stated, but there was nothing routine about it. For 10 minutes, Carol had paced the perimeter of Mark's front yard, her clipboard a scepter of judgment. Now, she tapped a perfectly manicured nail on a photograph. "This species of blue-stem grass," she said, her voice a carefully modulated instrument of authority, "is not on the approved list of perennial grasses. Mark, it creates a visual disruption, a violation of aesthetic harmony as outlined in the Community Standards document." Mark felt a familiar, slow-burning heat in his chest, but he kept his face neutral. He had prepared for this, for weeks. He had seen Carol's car slowing as it passed his house, her gaze lingering on the native plant garden he had spent the spring cultivating. It wasn't a garden of manicured boxwoods and imported tulips like the others on the street. It was a small, wild testament to the land as it once was, filled with coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, and the very blue-stem grass now under indictment. He opened his folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "Actually, Carol, it is," he said, his voice calm and even. "It's listed in the 2018 Landscape Addendum, officially adopted by the board on March 12th of that year. Page 4, Section 2B. It's categorized under drought-tolerant native species. I have the minutes from that meeting as well, if you'd like to see them." A flicker of something annoyance, perhaps surprise, crossed Carol's face before being smoothed away by her mask of placid control. She glanced at the paper without truly reading it, her authority momentarily checked. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't argued. He had simply presented a fact, a citation from the very document she wielded like a weapon in her world. This was a profound act of defiance. She pushed the paper back toward him. "I see. We will have to review the addendum for consistency. Thank you for bringing this to our attention." Her smile did not reach her eyes. They were cold, flat pools of slate gray. He had won the small battle, but the chill in the air told him he had made a powerful enemy. He had not just corrected her. He had embarrassed her in front of her subordinates. He had demonstrated that he, a mere homeowner, knew the rules as well as she did. To a person like Carol Peterson, whose entire identity was wrapped in the petty tyranny of the HOA board, this was an unforgivable sin. As he walked out of the clubhouse and into the humid afternoon air, Mark looked back at the manicured sign at the entrance Meadowbrook Estates, a community of distinction. He had never felt less a part of it. He just wanted to be left alone, to tend his garden and live in the house his father had helped him build. But he knew, with a certainty that settled like a stone in his gut, that this was far from over. Carol would not let it go. This wasn't about grass anymore. It was about control. That evening, the scent of lavender and chamomile from Sarah's tea filled the kitchen, a stark contrast to the sterile air of the clubhouse. She watched Mark at the counter, methodically cleaning the lenses of his glasses, a habit he fell into when his mind was churning. "You're quiet," she said softly, placing a mug beside him. "How did it go?" "It went as expected," Mark said, placing his glasses back on. "She tried to cite me for the blue-stem grass. I showed her the addendum that permits it." "So it's over," She'll leave you alone. Sarah's voice was hopeful, but her eyes, full of a deep and perceptive warmth, told him she already knew the answer. "No," he said, shaking his head slowly. "It's not over." I challenged her. "People like Carol don't just move on. They escalate." He took a sip of the tea, the warmth a small comfort. "She'll find something else. A loose shingle, the color of the trim, the exact angle of the mailbox." "Is this fight worth our peace of mind?" "Mark," she asked, her hand finding his. "We could just plant the approved grass, the one everyone else has." Mark turned to face her, his gaze drifting past her to the framed photograph on the wall. It was of him and his father, both covered in sawdust, grinning in front of the half-finished frame of this very house. His father, a geologist by trade and a naturalist by soul, had taught him to read the land. "It's not about the grass, Sarah. You know that." His father had despised places like Meadowbrook Estates, with their restrictive covenants that demanded uniformity and erased the natural character of the landscape. "They want a neighborhood that looks like a brochure, not a place that grew out of the earth." He used to say, "They pave paradise and put up a parking lot, and then fine you if your driveway has an oil stain." When his father was diagnosed, building this house together became their final project. They had compromised on the location, but not on the principles. They used reclaimed wood, oriented the windows for passive solar heating, and designed the landscaping to mimic the native prairie that had once covered these rolling hills. The garden was more than a collection of plants. It was a living memorial. Every coneflower, every stalk of bluestem grass, was a tribute to the man who had taught him to appreciate the intricate, untamable beauty of the natural world. Tearing it out would feel like a betrayal. "This was Dad's vision as much as it was mine," Mark said, his voice quiet. "To build something that belonged here, that respected the land instead of dominating it. Carol and her aesthetic harmony are the exact opposite of that. She wants to legislate nature into submission. I won't let her do that. Not here." Sarah squeezed his hand, her expression a mixture of love and worry. "I know. I just hate seeing you like this. So tense. This is supposed to be our sanctuary." "It is," he said, forcing a small smile. "And I'm going to protect it." He knew he was being principled to the point of stubbornness. He was an engineer, a man who believed in rules, data, and logic. If the rules were on his side, he would follow them to the letter. But he also knew Carol operated in a different sphere, one where the rules were merely a tool to enforce her will. He had won today with logic. He feared her next attack would be something logic couldn't touch. He spent the rest of the week in a state of watchful waiting. Every car that slowed down, every shadow that fell across the lawn, felt like a precursor to the next salvo. He reread the thick binder of the HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs, highlighting clauses and making notes in the margins. Preparing his defenses for a battle he didn't know how to predict. Peace of mind had already become a casualty of the war. The letter arrived a week later, on a Tuesday. It wasn't in the regular mail, but was delivered by a certified carrier who required a signature. The green slip was a harbinger of bad news, a formal declaration that this was no longer an informal dispute. Mark signed for it, his hand steady, and carried the stiff, legal-sized envelope into the kitchen. He slid it open with a knife, his movements precise and deliberate. Inside was a single sheet of heavy bond paper, bearing the letterhead of Apex Management Solutions, the firm that handled the HOA's day-to-day operations. The language was cold, formal, and devastating. This letter serves as a formal notice of violation of CC&R Figure 9.7 encroachments and the Meadowbrook Estates architectural standards. Section 4, Paragraph 3, Boundary Setbacks. An official survey commissioned by the association has determined that the fence located at the rear of your property, Lot 72, encroaches 18 inches onto the association's common area, designated as a scenic corridor. Pursuant to the governing documents, you are hereby required to cure this violation within 30 days of the date of this notice. This requires the complete removal of the encroaching fence at the homeowner's sole expense. You must then submit plans for a new, compliant fence to the Architectural Control Committee for approval. Failure to cure the violation within the specified timeframe will result in the levying of fines, beginning at $100 per day, and may lead to further legal action by the association, including but not limited to seeking a court order for the removal of the fence, with all associated legal costs billed to your account. Mark read the letter twice, then a third time. His breath caught in his chest. The fence. Not the garden. Not the trim. Not the mailbox. The fence. The beautiful cedar fence he and his father had built together during the last good summer, before the illness took hold. He remembered his father, frail but determined, showing him how to set the posts perfectly plumb, how to get the spacing of the pickets just right. The memory was so vivid, he could almost smell the fresh-cut cedar. 18 inches, an absurd, meaningless measurement, but in the hands of the HOA, it was a weapon of mass destruction. The scenic corridor was a 10-foot wide strip of uncut grass and scraggly trees that ran behind the backyards of his entire block. No one used it. No one even saw it. But it was designated as common area, and that was all Carol needed. He walked out the back door and stared at the fence line. It was straight and true. He had the original property survey from when they built the house, the one filed with the county. He knew exactly where the property markers were. He had placed the fence a full 6 inches inside his own property line, just to be safe. A cold, hard certainty washed over him. The HOA's official survey was a lie. This wasn't about an encroachment. This was retaliation. It was Carol, unable to win on the battlefield of the garden, choosing a new one where she could invent her own facts. He went back inside, his mind racing. 30 days. She had given him a deadline, a ticking clock designed to create panic and force a quick, costly surrender. But Mark wasn't panicking. The engineer in him was taking over, compartmentalizing the anger, focusing on the problem. He had a survey. They claimed to have a survey. It was a matter of dueling data, and in a contest of data. He knew he could win. He just had to get his hands on theirs. Mark spent the next 2 days crafting his response. He wrote and rewrote the email to Apex Management Solutions, carefully stripping it of any emotion, leaving only a polite, factual, and legally precise request. He attached a high-resolution PDF of his original, county-stamped property survey, dated October 14, 2017, clearly showing the property lines and the location of the survey markers. In the email, he wrote, "I am in receipt of your violation notice dated September 1st regarding my rear fence. I believe there has been a mistake. Attached, please find a copy of the official plat survey for my property, Lot 72, which was conducted prior to construction and is on file with the county recorder's office. As you can see, the fence is situated well within my property boundaries. To resolve this discrepancy, could you please provide me with a copy of the official survey commissioned by the association, referenced in your letter, including the date it was performed and the name of the surveying company?" He hit send, a small knot of tension easing in his stomach. It was a reasonable request, a simple matter of comparing two documents. Any rational organization would welcome the opportunity to clear up a misunderstanding. The reply came less than an hour later. It was brutally efficient. From Compliance, Apex Management Solutions. Com to Mark. Corrigan email. Com. Subject, Reviolation. Notice, Lot 72. Mr. Corrigan. The board's decision is based on the association's official survey. The violation stands. Sincerely, Compliance Department, Apex Management Solutions. That was it. No attachment, no answers to his questions, no acknowledgement of the evidence he had provided. Just a bureaucratic stonewall. He stared at the screen. The two terse sentences radiating a cold, dismissive power. They weren't just refusing to show him their evidence. They were telling him that his evidence didn't matter. The board had spoken, and the matter was closed. The frustration was a physical thing, a tightening in his jaw, a pressure behind his eyes. He had tried to play by the rules, to be logical and respectful. He had been met with an iron door slamming in his face. It was then he realized the full scope of the problem. This wasn't a dispute that could be resolved with facts and emails. Carol had insulated herself behind the faceless shield of the management company. She was making the decisions, but they were the ones delivering the verdicts. Immune to reason or appeal. He stood up and walked to the window overlooking his backyard. The fence stood strong and proud in the afternoon light. Sarah was right. This was supposed to be their sanctuary. But now it felt like a battlefield, and the enemy was laying siege. If they could invent a survey to steal 18 inches of his land, what was to stop them from taking more? This was no longer just about his father's memory or a patch of grass. It was about the fundamental principle of his home being his own. His path was clear. If they wouldn't give him the information, he would have to go and get it himself. The quiet, methodical engineer was being pushed aside by a man who was now a quiet, methodical investigator. He would pull on every thread, open every door, and follow the paper trail wherever it led. He made a vow to himself. Standing there in the quiet of his home, he would not tear down that fence. He would tear down Carol Peterson's corrupt little empire instead. Mark's first official act of investigation was a formal request, sent via certified mail to Apex Management, for copies of the HOA's complete financial records and all board meeting minutes for the past 3 years. State law guaranteed homeowners access to these documents, a fact he was sure Carol would resent. It was a fishing expedition, but he needed to understand the system he was fighting. While he waited for the inevitable resistance and delay, he made a phone call that felt like reaching into the past. David Mark Corrigan, John Corrigan's son. The voice on the other end was warm and gravelly, like stones tumbling in a slow river. Mark, of course I'd know that name anywhere. Your father was one of the finest men I ever knew. How are you, son? David Chen was a retired county surveyor who had worked with Mark's father for over 20 years. They had shared a love for the land and a disdain for sloppy work. David was a legend in the county recorder's office, a man who could read plat maps like a poet reads verse. Mark explained the situation: the fence, the scenic corridor, the HOA's refusal to provide their survey. David listened patiently, letting out a low whistle when Mark finished. A scenic corridor, David mused. That's a new one. Sounds like something they made up over cocktails. Let me guess. The president is a real piece of work. You have no idea, Mark said. Tell you what, Mark, your dad helped me out of a bind more times than I can count. Bring your survey and that violation letter over to my office. Let's have a look at the real maps, the ones that matter, the ones filed with the county before a single shovel of dirt was turned in that whole subdivision. David's office was a converted garage, smelling of old paper, pipe tobacco, and coffee. Floor-to-ceiling shelves were crammed with rolled-up maps, thick binders, and surveying equipment that looked like museum pieces. David, a small, spry man in his late 70s with a shock of white hair, cleared a space on a massive wooden drafting table. He unrolled Mark's survey first. "Good. Clean work. Miller & Sons. They're a solid outfit." Then he shuffled over to a large flat file cabinet and pulled out a massive, aged sheet of linen paper. "And this," he said, spreading it carefully on the table, "is the master, the original 1998 county plat map for the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision. Phase 1. This is the legal Bible. Anything not on this map is, to put it politely, fiction." For an hour, they pored over the documents. David used a magnifying glass and a series of worn wooden rulers, tracing lines, muttering calculations. Mark watched, fascinated by the old-world precision of the work. Finally, David leaned back, tapping a long, bony finger on the 1998 plat map. "There it is. Or rather, there it isn't." He pointed to the area behind Mark's property. "See this? It's designated as common area, drainage, and utility easement. Standard stuff. Allows the county to access sewer lines, electrical, what have you. It's 10 feet wide, just like you said. But there is absolutely no mention of a scenic corridor. Not here. Not in the original covenant declarations filed with the county." "So where did it come from?" Mark asked. "The board most likely created it themselves with a rule change or a resolution at some point." David explained, "They can do that, but what they can't do is change the fundamental use of a designated easement without a formal vote of the entire membership and refiling with the county. And they certainly can't use a self-created designation to claim your private property. Your fence is on Lot 72. This easement is on common area land, as long as your fence isn't on their side of that line." He traced the boundary with his finger. "They don't have a leg to stand on." He looked at Mark, his eyes sharp. "This survey they're waving around, it's either incompetent or it's fraudulent, and I'm betting it's not the former. Get me the name of the company that did it. I know every surveyor in this county. Some are good, some are fast, and some are for hire." Mark left David's office with a certified copy of the 1998 plat map and a renewed sense of purpose. He now had the bedrock of his case, an official, unimpeachable document that contradicted the HOA's claim. The scenic corridor was a legal fiction, a ghost conjured by the board to haunt him. All he had to do was prove it. A week later, a thick manila envelope arrived from Apex Management Solutions. It contained the meeting minutes and financials Mark had requested. He spread the documents across his dining room table, which had now become his war room, as he sifted through the pages of budgets, expense reports, and meeting summaries. A pattern began to emerge. The HOA's legal fees were unusually high. So were the landscaping and maintenance costs. Then, he found the minutes from the board meeting on May 10th of this year. He scanned the agenda items: approval of Q2 financials, pool maintenance contract, and then discussion of common area boundary survey. His pulse quickened. This was it. But as he turned to the detailed summary of the discussion, he was met with a solid black rectangle. 2 full paragraphs had been heavily redacted, blacked out with a marker so thick it had bled slightly through the page. The only text visible was the resolution that followed motion to accept the survey performed by Precision Boundary Surveying as the new official survey of record for the association. Passed 3-2. Redacted minutes, the ultimate sign of a secret being kept, What could a board possibly need to hide about a routine boundary survey unless it wasn't routine? Mark's mind raced back to his conversation with David. Get me the name of the company. Precision Boundary Surveying. He typed the name into his computer's search engine. Their website was professional, but generic. He clicked on the About Us page. The principal surveyor and owner was a man named Thomas Gable. The name was vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. He did another search, this time for Carol Peterson husband. The first result was a campaign website for Robert Peterson, who was running for a seat on the city council. Mark scanned the bio. Robert was a local businessman, owner of a successful commercial real estate firm. Mark clicked on a link to Robert's social media page. He scrolled through photos of fundraisers, ribbon cuttings, and community events. And then he saw it. A family photo from last Christmas. Carol and Robert stood in the center, smiling broadly. To their left stood a younger woman, identified in the caption as Carol's sister, alongside her husband. Mark zoomed in on the man's face. He felt a jolt of recognition. It was the same man from the surveying company's website. The caption read, "My wonderful sister-in-law, Heather, and her husband, Tom Gable." Thomas Gable, owner of Precision Boundary Surveying, Carol Peterson's brother-in-law. A cold, sickening wave of understanding washed over Mark. It all clicked into place. The secret survey, the redacted minutes, the refusal to provide him with a copy. The board hadn't just commissioned a survey. Carol had commissioned one from her own family. A surveyor for hire. As David had put it, a surveyor who would no doubt be happy to find whatever encroachments his powerful sister-in-law needed him to find. The motive wasn't just power anymore. It was a clear-cut, undeniable conflict of interest. This was corruption, plain and simple. Driven by a new, furious energy. Mark dug deeper, cross-referencing the HOA's financial statements with Robert Peterson's campaign donor list. He found it within minutes. The HOA's primary landscaping contractor, Greenscapes Unlimited, the very company that would likely be hired to remediate the common area behind his fence, was listed as a gold-level donor to Robert's city council campaign. The entire scheme lay exposed on his dining room table. Carol uses her brother-in-law's company to create a fraudulent survey, identifying a non-existent violation on the property of a homeowner who defied her. She uses this violation to force the homeowner to tear down a fence, then hires a friendly landscaping company to do unnecessary work on the common area. Paid for with HOA funds, that company, in turn, funnels money back to her husband's political campaign. It was a perfect, self-contained ecosystem of kickbacks and power, all built on the foundation of a lie about 18 inches of land. And Mark was standing right in the middle of it. The weight of the discovery was immense. He wasn't just fighting a fine anymore. He was taking on a conspiracy. Armed with the truth, Mark felt a surge of confidence. But Carol, sensing his continued resistance, decided to escalate. The next monthly board meeting was her stage, and she was the star of the show. The meeting was held in the same soulless clubhouse room. Mark sat in the back, a silent observer. About 20 other homeowners were scattered among the chairs, most looking bored, simply fulfilling their civic duty. Carol sat at the head table, flanked by the rest of the board. She opened the meeting with the president's report. Her gaze swept across the room, a monarch addressing her subjects. I want to take a moment to discuss an issue that affects us all: the responsible use of our community funds. Her eyes briefly flickered toward Mark before moving on. Recently, the board has had to expend significant resources both in time and legal consultation addressing compliance issues with a very small number of homeowners. These are homeowners who, for their own reasons, have chosen to disregard the rules that we all agree to live by. She didn't use his name. But every head in the room turned to look at him. He felt his face flush. The heat of public shame a potent and unpleasant force. His neighbors, people he'd shared polite waves with for years, now looked at him with suspicion and annoyance. This uncooperative behavior, Carol continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy, costs the association money, money that could be spent on improving our pool, resurfacing the tennis courts, or planting new flowers at the entrance. When one person decides the rules don't apply to them, we all end up paying the price. It was a masterful performance. She had reframed his principled stand as selfish defiance, painting him as the villain who was stealing from his neighbors. The narrative was simple, powerful, and completely untrue. The board then moved to the next agenda item, Mark's violation. In a rehearsed, emotionless tone, the secretary announced, "The board has reviewed the fence encroachment on Lot 72. As the homeowner has not provided a remediation plan, the board moves to schedule a formal hearing as per the bylaws. Furthermore, the board has voted to impose fines of $100 per day, retroactive to the expiration of the initial 30-day notice." It was a public execution. They had not only formalized the next step in the due process chain, sending him a notice of hearing, but they had also weaponized the fines, backdating them to maximize the financial pressure. The message was clear: we are in control. We will bankrupt you before we let you win. As the meeting adjourned, his neighbors actively avoided his gaze. They shuffled out quickly, whispering among themselves. He was an outcast, the problem homeowner. The isolation was a heavy cloak. As he walked toward his car in the near-empty parking lot, a soft voice called his name. "Mr. Corrigan." He turned to see Eleanor Gable, an elderly widow who lived a few streets over. She was clutching her purse, her face etched with a deep, weary concern. I wanted to say, be careful," she whispered, glancing around as if expecting Carol to materialize from the shadows. "They did the same thing to me last year." "What happened?" Mark asked gently. "My shutters," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I had them repainted. The painter used Dover beige, but the approved color is antique beige. I couldn't even tell the difference. They sent me a violation. Then the fines started. $50 a day. On my fixed income. I couldn't afford it. I tried to reason with them. But they wouldn't listen." "What did you do?" Eleanor looked down at her shoes. "I paid a different painter $2,000 to repaint them in the right color, and I paid the $900 in fines. It's not worth the trouble." "Dear," she said, her eyes pleading with him, "they have all the power. Just move the fence. It's not worth what they'll put you through." Mark looked at this kind, frightened woman, a victim of the same arbitrary cruelty he was facing. Her story wasn't just a warning. It was a clarification. He saw with absolute certainty that his fight wasn't just for his own property or his father's memory. It was for Eleanor. It was for every homeowner who had been bullied into submission, fined into compliance, and shamed into silence. "Thank you, Eleanor," he said, his voice firm with a newfound resolve. "But I can't do that. Someone has to." He now had his moral compass. The fear and isolation he'd felt moments before burned away, replaced by a cold, righteous anger. This would end at the annual homeowners meeting, the one place all year where the residents had a real voice. He would use his 5 minutes not just to save his fence, but to give people like Eleanor their power back. The week leading up to the annual homeowners meeting was a blur of methodical preparation. Mark's dining room table disappeared under a sea of documents: the certified plat map, the HOA's redacted minutes, the campaign finance reports, printouts of the state statutes governing homeowner associations. He rehearsed his presentation again and again, timing it with his phone's stopwatch. He had to be concise, logical, and devastatingly clear. This was not a plea for sympathy. It was the presentation of an indictment. 2 nights before the meeting, as he was arranging his exhibits into a neat, compelling sequence, the doorbell rang. Standing on his porch was Robert Peterson, Carol's husband, the aspiring city councilman. He was dressed in a crisp suit, his politician's smile firmly in place. "Mark, good to see you," Robert said, extending a hand. "Can I have a word?" Wary, Mark let him in. They stood in the entryway, the tension thick between them. "Look," Robert began, dropping the smile and adopting a confidential, man-to-man tone. "I'm here because this situation with the fence, it's gotten out of hand. It's bad for everyone, bad for the community, bad for you, and frankly, the optics are not great for my campaign." Mark said nothing, waiting. "Carol can be zealous," Robert admitted. A masterful understatement. "She believes deeply in this community's standards. But I think we can find an off-ramp here that works for everyone. A win-win." He leaned in slightly. "Here's the deal. You drop this at the annual meeting. Don't make a speech. Don't present your evidence. Just quietly withdraw your appeal. In exchange, I will personally pay to have your fence moved by the best crew in town. No cost to you. And that ridiculous fine against Mrs. Gable for her shutters, I'll see to it that it gets refunded. Anonymously. We can make all of this just go away." The offer hung in the air, seductive in its simplicity. It was an easy way out. His fence would be saved, albeit moved. His money would be safe. And an innocent neighbor, Eleanor, would be made whole. All he had to do was stay silent. All he had to do was let the corrupt system remain in place. It was the ultimate test of his character. Was this fight just about him? Or was it about the principle? Mark looked past Robert's earnest, pleading face toward his dining room, at the piles of evidence representing weeks of stress and sleepless nights. He thought of Eleanor's fearful eyes, of the neighbors who were too intimidated to speak up, of his father's belief in doing things the right way, no matter how hard. He met Robert's gaze, his own expression unyielding. "Thank you for the offer, Robert," he said, his voice level and cold. "But you've misunderstood the problem. The problem isn't my fence, and it isn't Mrs. Gable's shutters. It's the system. It's the conflicts of interest, the lack of transparency, and the abuse of power. That has to be addressed publicly." Robert's face hardened, the mask of the friendly politician falling away to reveal a core of angry entitlement. "You're making a big mistake. Corrigan, you have no idea who you're messing with." "And you have no idea who you're messing with," Mark replied, opening the door. "I'll see you at the meeting." As Robert stormed off, Mark closed the door, his heart hammering in his chest. He had refused the bribe. He had crossed the Rubicon. There was no turning back now. The climax was set, and he would face it, alone if he had to, in front of the entire community. The night of the annual meeting, the clubhouse was packed, every seat was filled, and people stood along the back walls. This meeting, usually a sparsely attended formality, had become the hottest ticket in town. Whispers and rumors had been circulating for days. Word of Mark's quiet investigation, of Carol's escalating campaign against him, had finally saturated the neighborhood's consciousness. Mark and Sarah found seats near the front. He clutched a USB drive in his pocket. Containing the presentation he had distilled into 5 minutes of pure, unassailable fact. On the stage, a large screen was set up behind the board's table. To its right, on a separate stand, was a large digital clock, its red numbers glowing ominously at 0010. Carol called the meeting to order, her voice tight and controlled. She moved through the opening agenda items with brisk, angry efficiency. When she reached the homeowner forum, she laid out the ground rules. Each speaker will have a maximum of 5 minutes. The time will be strictly enforced to ensure the meeting proceeds in an orderly fashion. First on the list is Mark Corrigan, regarding the violation on Lot 72. As Mark walked to the podium, a volunteer started the clock. The red numbers began their relentless descent. EO4, 59, EO4, 58. Mark plugged the USB drive into the laptop at the podium. His hands were sweating, but his voice was steady as he began. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Corrigan. The board has cited me for a fence they claim encroaches on common area. I'm here tonight to present the facts of the case. 0445. He clicked, and the first slide appeared on the screen, a side-by-side comparison. On the left was the HOA's violation notice. On the right was the terse email from Apex Management. This is the accusation, he said simply, and this is the board's response to my evidence. A refusal to engage or provide proof. A low murmur went through the crowd. The HO3, 50. He clicked again. The next slide showed two maps. On the left was the official, certified 1998 county plat map. Its lines clear, its text legally binding. On the right was the crude, undated, and uncertified sketch the HOA's management company had finally sent him after his third request. This is the official legal record of our community, on file with the county, he said, pointing to the plat map. And this, he pointed to the other, is the evidence the board is using against me. Notice the discrepancy. The county map shows a drainage and utility easement. The board's map shows a scenic corridor that simply does not legally exist. The murmuring grew louder. People were leaning forward in their seats. 0250. The next slide displayed a single block of text, highlighted in yellow. This is from our own governing documents. CC&R Section 8.4.2 states that any change to common area boundaries or usage must be approved by a 2/3 majority vote of all homeowners. I've reviewed 5 years of meeting minutes. I asked the board, when did that vote take place? He paused, letting the question hang in the silent room. Carol stared straight ahead, her face a pale, rigid mask. 0155. He held up a physical document, a page with a large black rectangle in the middle. He then clicked to the next slide, which showed a high-resolution scan of the same redacted page. This is from the minutes of the May 10th board meeting, where they approved their official survey. I asked the board a simple question. What is being hidden from us in these minutes? What discussion required this level of secrecy from the homeowners who pay your salaries? The room was electric now. The atmosphere had shifted from passive curiosity to active, angry engagement. 059, and finally, Mark said, his voice ringing with conviction. We come to the why. Why invent a violation? Why hide the discussion? The final slide appeared. It was an infographic, simple and damning. On one side was a photo of Carol and her brother-in-law, Thomas Gable, owner of Precision Boundary Surveying. An arrow pointed from his company to a copy of the HOA's check for surveying services. On the other side was a photo of Carol's husband, Robert. An arrow led from Greenscapes Unlimited, the HOA's primary landscaper, to a screenshot of Robert's campaign donor list, showing their contribution. This isn't about a fence, Mark said, his eyes scanning the faces of his neighbors. The clock showed 10 seconds left. It's about due process. It's about conflicts of interest. It's about the responsible use of our money. I urge the board to immediately reverse this fine and authorize a full, independent audit of the association's financials and contracts. 0003, 0002, 0001, 0000. The clock beeped. Mark's time was up. He stepped back from the podium as a stunned. Absolute silence fell over the room. The silence lasted for 3 long, breathless seconds before it shattered. The room erupted, not in applause, but in an uproar of angry, overlapping questions shouted from every corner. An audit. He's right. What was in those minutes, Carol? Is your brother-in-law a contractor for the HOA? Our fees are paying for his campaign. Carol, her face ashen and her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the table, banged the gavel repeatedly. Order. This is not a debate. The speaker's time is concluded. We will move to the next item. But she had lost control. The dam of homeowner apathy had broken, and a flood of outrage was sweeping through the room. A man in the third row, a retired accountant, Mark vaguely knew, stood up. Madam President, I'd like to make a motion from the floor. You are out of order, Carol snapped, her voice cracking. According to the bylaws, Section 3.9 motions from the floor are permissible during the annual meeting with a simple majority vote to consider, the man retorted, holding up a copy of the governing documents. I move that the board immediately freeze all pending fines and enforcement actions related to architectural violations, pending the results of a full, independent financial audit to be conducted by a firm with no prior relationship with this community or any member of the board. Second came a chorus of voices from around the room. Carol looked desperately at the other board members, but they were avoiding her gaze, staring down at their notes or out at the angry crowd. They knew which way the wind was blowing. All in favor of the motion, the accountant called out, taking charge. A forest of hands shot up. Mark looked around the room and saw not just anger, but empowerment on the faces of his neighbors. Eleanor Gable's hand was raised high, her expression one of fierce, quiet pride. All opposed. Only one hand went up Carol's, a weak, lonely gesture of defiance. The motion passes, the accountant declared into the cacophony. Carol stared out at the sea of faces, her expression a mixture of shock, fury, and, for a fleeting moment, a deep, hollow fear. Her carefully constructed empire of rules and retribution had been dismantled in 5 minutes by a man with a folder and a few well-aimed facts. She banged the gavel one last time. A sharp, futile crack in the noisy room. "This meeting is adjourned," she yelled. And then she gathered her papers and swept off the stage, her husband Robert following in her wake like a shadow. Mark felt Sarah's hand slide into his. He looked at her, and she was smiling, her eyes shining with tears of relief and pride. David Chen, standing in the back, caught his eye and gave him a slow, deliberate nod of approval. Neighbors were now approaching him, clapping him on the back, shaking his hand, their faces full of gratitude and apology. He hadn't just saved his fence, he had given them their community back. The weeks that followed were a quiet revolution. The independent audit, authorized by the overwhelming vote, revealed everything Mark had suspected and more. It uncovered a pattern of no-bid contracts awarded to vendors connected to board members, inflated invoices for landscaping services, and the use of association funds for questionable legal fees, primarily aimed at homeowner disputes. The unredacted minutes from the May 10th meeting, obtained by the auditors, detailed a heated debate in which 2 board members had explicitly warned Carol about the conflict of interest in hiring her brother-in-law. But she had pushed the vote through anyway. Faced with the undeniable evidence and the threat of a recall petition that had already gathered more than enough signatures, Carol Peterson and two of her loyalist board members submitted their resignations. Apex Management Solutions, thoroughly discredited, had their contract terminated by the interim board. A special election was held. Mark, who had no desire for power but felt a deep sense of responsibility, allowed his name to be placed on the ballot. He was elected to the new, resident-led board with the highest vote count in the community's history. His first official act at his first meeting as a board member was to propose a new transparency and ethics bylaw. It required all contracts to go through a competitive bidding process, explicitly forbade any financial relationship between the association and businesses owned by board members or their immediate families, and mandated that all meeting minutes be published in full, without redaction. It passed unanimously. One sunny Saturday morning, a few months after the annual meeting, Mark was in his backyard, oiling the cedar planks of the fence he had fought so hard to protect. The bluestem grass in the front yard swayed gently in the breeze, a small, defiant flag of native beauty. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't realized he'd been missing for so long. Sarah brought him out a glass of lemonade and a letter that had come in the mail. The envelope was personal stationery, the address written in a neat, elegant cursive. He opened it. It was from Eleanor Gable. Dear Mark, I hope this letter finds you well. I don't think I ever properly thanked you for what you did. You stood up for all of us, who were too afraid to stand up for ourselves. You gave us our voices back. After that meeting, a few of us started talking. We realized that what happened to you, and what happened to me, could happen again if we're not vigilant. We also realized that fighting back can be expensive and lonely. So, inspired by your courage, we have started something new. We call it the Neighborhood Defense Fund, a small, voluntary community fund to help residents with legal advice or fees if they are ever faced with arbitrary or unfair fines from the board. It is our way of ensuring that no one ever has to choose between their life savings and the color of their shutters again. We are a community again. Mark, a real one, and we have you to thank for it. Yours in gratitude, Eleanor. Mark read the letter twice, a slow smile spreading across his face. He handed it to Sarah, who read it and looked at him, her eyes bright with emotion. His victory hadn't just ended a corrupt regime. It had planted the seeds of something far better. The community wasn't just healing. It was growing stronger, more resilient, and more connected than ever before. He looked at the strong, straight fence line, a symbol not of division, but of a principle defended. He looked at the home he and his father had built, a sanctuary once again, and he knew, with a deep and abiding certainty, that the fight had been worth it.